Welcome back to Interact, everyone. I am Connor Bronsden, one of your Dev Interrupted community leaders, and I'm joined today by Alwar Pillai, the CEO and co-founder of Fable. Thank you so much for joining me, Alwar.
Thanks, Connor. Super excited and pumped to be here.
Yeah, I loved your podcast episode, and I'm really excited to go deeper in this session. To set the stage, can you quickly tell the audience a bit about what Fable is and what you do?
Yeah, for sure. So Fable is a company, and we are focused on helping companies build inclusive products. And we do that in a couple of different ways. One is we have our Fable Engage product that companies subscribe to, and through that, they can research, test, and validate their product with real people with disabilities throughout the product development process. So that one's been in the market for a while, and we know it's adding a lot of value to our customers. And then we have our Fable Upskill product, which is basically helping companies and digital teams build up their skill set when it comes to accessibility. You know, this is a pretty up and coming industry. People are learning more about accessibility and the importance of accessibility, but don't really have the skill sets and awareness needed to act on accessibility. So that's what Fable Upskill does.
That's a perfect summary. Thank you. And I think it really sets the table for what we want to talk about today, which is how can we bring accessibility into development processes? And I know there's so many engineering leaders listening who have been thinking about this or maybe taking some first steps. But let's maybe go with the beginning of this. When should accessibility be considered in the product development process?
It should be considered at every stage of the product development process, because ultimately every, research decision you're making, design decision you're making, engineering decision you're making is ultimately impacting the user experience. So the sooner you know, the more informed the team is going to be to make a more inclusive process. So at Fable, we often say that, everyone contributes to an accessible experience. It's not one person's job or one person's sole responsibility to make, the entire product accessible. Everyone contributes to it, and everyone should know what areas they are responsible for so that, the end product or the end result, when it actually goes to your end user, they don't face any hiccups or challenges.
Awesome. I think that makes total sense to try to include throughout, because otherwise you're going to find there are gaps. In particular, obviously as an engineering leadership developer conference, how do you include developers in that user research process so that they are consistently engaging with and considering accessibility throughout everything they're doing?
Yeah, so I think it's good to kind of take a little bit of a step back here and just look at how we, organize teams and who is in charge of what. So often developers are not connected to the research process, right? It's because
Totally.
they often just get insights of this is the feedback that we got, or this is the qualitative or quantitative metrics we're seeing, and that's why we want to make change. So developers are not really interacting with the people who are ultimately using our products. So I think it's time for us to kind of decentralize that and give people more access, because when you see someone not able to use the product that you helped build, there's a certain weight to that. You feel responsible, you feel ownership of the decision, and you're like, oh, I can actually fix this problem. So I feel we kind of recommend people to bring engineers into research sessions, into design sessions, because when you ultimately see someone using it, you have the context of exactly where the challenges are. It's not something that's, just written in Jira or, this is an issue and this is a priority issue. You're actually watching a user experience. And we've often seen when developers for the first time interact with our testers with disabilities, they're blown away because it's something that they never considered. It's an interaction they never considered. And they're like, oh, this is actually not hard. I can easily solve this problem. And there have been some sessions where developers have gone into the code while the session's happening, quickly make a change, and then validate with the tester if that was a better experience. So I think it's extremely valuable to give access to developers, not just to the insights, but also firsthand experience of watching someone and observing someone use your product.
That makes total sense, because it just means you're not going to get the filtered version. You're going to actually be able to really experience how customers, particularly customers of different needs, are experiencing the product and using it. So obviously it sounds like getting devs involved in that process is really important. How do you avoid that research being siloed though? So let's say a dev gets in there and like makes that change right as they're having the conversation. How do you then report those learnings back to the rest of the team and make sure that's something that's considered over time?
So those are more like edge case scenarios when like people are like eager and just go in and make the changes. Usually what we see is, playing a role of an observer. This is pretty common in research practices where, you have, one person who's actually interviewing the participant or the tester. And then there are people who are just observing off camera or on camera and are able to like see.
Like the audience here.
So like the audience here who are just observing. So I think being in those sessions is really important. And then you're able to actually, create little clips and share it with the team. If, for instance, you can have someone who is blind, who is a screen reading user and is trying to sign up for your app and like the form to sign up doesn't work. And if you're able to show even a 1 minute or 30-second clip of someone struggling, and then that gets shared with your team, now everyone has the context of what the issue is. So there's different ways of doing it, and how teams kind of organize user insights and how they distribute it. But I think the video element goes a long way in helping understand that.
That's a great point. And it does give digital access worldwide too, so that you can reach out to folks who maybe wouldn't normally be involved in the process.
And I think, I think it's also, it's just, we kind of approach like being like product-led businesses. I think it just shifts everyone to be like user obsessed, right?
Right.
It's not just like completing a task, the task, but it's like everyone now is thinking about the user experience, not just the researcher, not just the designer. And I think engineers contribute a lot to that and should have a little bit more of a voice in shaping that user experience as well.
How do you encourage that kind of research mentality to help shape that user voice in developers who maybe don't have experience being in those research sessions?
Yeah, I think there's different ways that you can start doing that. I think the best is to, come into those sessions and first be a silent participant where you are just listening, you're just consuming, nothing's being asked of you. And then we see once people start to get a little more comfortable, we've seen instances where developers, engineers, or QA analysts where they actually have co-design sessions where, they are making changes, they're asking the tester and the participant, and it becomes a little more like a back and forth of ideation. But that'll happen once you're like more comfortable in those environments. But first, just get started with listening and paying attention. And then as you feel more comfortable, you can actually start to be more of a contributor and participator of those sessions.
And how would you encourage engineering leaders in the audience to get buy-in from their developers to, go spend time in this session that they have never done before?
Yeah, I think it's, instead of us making assumptions of what we think is the most important feature and the most important change to make, or like these are priority issues, it's always like, let's get a gut check. Let's actually understand where users sit and have developers who, especially if there's a lot of friction, right? When we see with accessibility, people think like, oh, this is so much to do. It's going to be so complicated. And we have to kind of pause a lot of other things that we're doing to make products accessible. And so we always recommend like, get a benchmark first, like really understand where you're at. And you're going to understand where you're at by actually engaging and observing users with disabilities. So I think it's a way of building awareness that engineering leaders can use. Like, to get started, let's understand the users first before we make assumptions, before we think about it from a compliance perspective. And I think that will automatically just gain some interest. And then as soon as someone sees the challenges, it's really hard to forget. We had one of the engineers this was a while ago who worked on some accessibility issues, some insights that they got from Fable. And they literally were like, sent us a meme of like pulling their hair out and saying, I can't stop seeing accessibility issues now. Everywhere I look, I see accessibility issues. So I think it's one of those things where, once you notice it, you're not going to not notice it.
And that creates this increased accountability, it sounds like.
It totally does. I think, anyone who's part of product development process, like we take a lot of, pride in the work we do and the work we push out. And if you see someone struggling, you feel a sense of accountability. And I often say as like I often say like inclusion is a technical problem. And the reason I say it is because as people in product development processes, we are literally dictating who gets access to the digital world, who gets to work, who gets to participate, who gets to enjoy, just entertainment because of some of the decisions we're making. So I think that increased accountability will like automatically and naturally happen.
And it reminds us of the weight of our decisions. I think that's a great point. I suspect everyone here has worked on a product before where when it actually went to market, users were using it in a different way than you expected. And it shows how disconnected we can be sometimes from the end user and how they're experiencing the product. So this inclusion of user research and engaging devs in that process, I think is incredibly necessary, particularly around accessibility. What are some everyday tools with customizable features or natural integration of products that have these accessibility options?
Yeah, we experience it on such a day-to-day basis. I like to say, and this is something that is, known in the accessibility space, is that disability is not binary. Like you're gonna experience disability, either temporarily, permanently, or situational. So if you think about products that we use on a day-to-day basis, like do you use an electric toothbrush?
Yeah.
Cool. So an electric toothbrush was designed for people with motor impairments and to make it easier for them to brush their teeth. And this is something now that's widely adopted by, just the commercial market. And if you look at it from a digital standpoint, dark mode has become just a common expectation now.
It's the
Like
right
I have
one for the record.
I have specific tools that I just have in dark mode all the time, and it what it does, it just gives you the option, right?
Yeah.
You have the option to choose what you want. And I think that's what accessibility does. It gives the ability for products to adapt to your needs and your preferences. And so dark mode also, for visually impaired, different levels of vision impairments that now is like widely adopted by everyone. Even if you think about just, when you're driving, the fact that you can narrate and send a text message was something that was, designed for people with physical impairments again. So the way I like to help explain this is that, you have circles of varying degrees. And when we think about product development, we like to think about the most common, like what's going to be a feature that, most people are going to benefit from. And then you step back a little and you're going to have people who don't fall under that, who are more at the margins or more at the extremes. And so the recommendation with inclusive product development processes is that let's design for the people at the margins. Let's design for the people who actually find it the most challenging. And when you do that, you actually take care of everyone in between because you've now built a product that is adaptable, customizable, and more personable.
And it's good for the business, right? Like you're working better with your users and you're increasing your total addressable market. If you can reach everyone, then that's an advantage for you.
Exactly. There are over 1 billion people with disabilities in the world, and we have a very rapidly growing aging market. And a lot of the baby boomers use technology now. And so it is expected from them to, make sure that they can continue using products the same way they do. There's this quote by Don Norman, who, designed the first iPhone, and it was known for, just how much they changed user interface completely. And now he's 80 years old and is struggling to use the iPhone.
Wow.
Because it's not designed for someone who's older, who deals with more tremor. And so just kind of thinking of all the different interactions that people can have in various situations is important.
And I'm thinking of like even really simple things like increasing text size for people who have, limits to vision. There's so much out there that is kind of baked into these everyday products. Yet maybe doesn't go far enough in some cases to help enable people to have access.
Exactly. And you might be, again, in your car, and it might be easier for you to read text in just a larger print because, you're in a moving vehicle, and just having that option is good.
Yeah, I'll speak to like my own family's personal experience. My grandmother has hearing aids, and like one of the most like transformative things for her around communication with people I know has been her phone is now upgraded to include like a live transcription for her, so she can actually ensure that she's hearing what people are talking about, because otherwise it's hard for her over the phone to talk to people because she can't like see their lips moving at the same time. And I know that's just been
Yeah.
a massive thing for her. And that's something that's we're seeing enabled by technology in so many different products, and we need to take advantage of it.
Hmm. Totally.
So if you're an engineering leader or developer in the audience who wants to take your first steps forward on baking accessibility into your development process, do you have actionable first steps that you'd recommend they take?
Yeah, I think if it's, something that you're just getting started with that you haven't done before, it obviously has to start with like education and awareness. It's to understand, why we have to even work on accessibility in the first place. Yes, we do have laws and we have to be compliant, but it's important to understand the why behind all of it. And then that boils down to different users interact with products differently and what are the different ways. So people with different impairments, different assistive technologies. So gaining that awareness and understanding, I think, is the first step. And then the second step is it's hard to introduce change into, processes that you're following that has been effective for you. So what can we start to do now to consider accessibility better? One of the things that I often see is, accessibility always sits at low priority because well, a lot of people experience it, or we don't have any accessibility issues. But maybe you don't have accessibility issues because no one can even sign up for your product, and no one's able to like get into your
Yeah.
product to let you know about accessibility issues. So we always try to don't use the same priority matrix that you would use for other issues for accessibility, because it's not a concept of just volume and frequency, but it should be actually looked at from a perspective of impact. Like, is a user able to complete it? Is there issues that are just barring them from completing it, or is the issue more I have to take 10 steps to complete it, where someone who's able-bodied just has to take one? So I think weighing it based on impact helps development teams integrate accessibility more frequently.
These are great points. And I really appreciate you taking the time to show up for Interact and have this wonderful conversation with me. Particularly with Fable as our accessibility partner for this event, it's really challenged us to make sure that we're stepping our own game up and ensuring that we provide the most access for Interact and to this content, because I agree with your mission that we not only is it the right thing to do, it's also the most business sense thing to do to increase that total addressable market, to increase the opportunity. So now let's hear from one of Fable's developers about how they conduct those user interviews and really give us some insights into next steps that can be taken and how to work to bake accessible development into their development process.
Hi, my name is Danielle Graham, and I'm a front-end developer and web accessibility specialist at Fable. Since joining the team at Fable, I've had the opportunity to prepare and conduct user interviews myself. I've been a part of user interviews sort of in the background, being led by our UX team. And of course, I've received feedback from different forms of user research to implement back into our platform. Participating and getting this feedback has given me a way better understanding of all kinds of assistive technologies, user experience in general, and especially of our platform itself. I've used the knowledge from these interviews to directly affect change on related features that we might have been asking about, but also when planning and building out new unrelated features, where a piece of feedback might be totally relevant in this case as well, or a different pattern that I learned about how our users expect things to be done on the platform has come up again. I've always said that getting into accessibility has just made me a better developer, and it's been one of my favorite parts of this journey. I write cleaner, more intentional, and more semantic code, and being able to incorporate feedback from users into that process has been incredibly validating. Before joining Fable, I hadn't ever been a part of any user research. I sort of felt like my accessibility experience was a little bit more theoretical, or I kind of had imposter syndrome. It was still important, and I'm really proud of the work that I had done, but getting direct feedback from users about the things that I had built has given me a lot more confidence, and it's really helped me to grow my accessibility maturity. One piece of feedback that has really stuck with me is keeping important content and calls to action on the left side of the screen, or making it really obvious that there's more content on the right side. We had some feedback from users that a really important call to action on a page on the platform they weren't able to find it. The problem was that the button was all the way on the right side where there was a lot of space between a piece of content and the button. And it wasn't that obvious that it would be there. And so they didn't even know where to look for it. And once I saw that, it seemed like such a simple, of course, that would happen. But screen magnification was something that I didn't have a lot of experience with before joining Fable. I knew what it was because I was really interested in accessibility, but it's not something that you see talked about a lot. And so this is a piece of feedback that has come up a lot and is incredibly relevant in just general UI design. One piece of advice that has really been driven home for me through user interviews is that it can be really, really easy to over engineer a solution for accessibility's sake. If you have the opportunity to test with users often, do it as soon as possible. As developers, we're sort of conditioned to seek out documentation and specs to tell us the right way to do a thing. With accessibility, unfortunately, it's not always that simple. There are so many different technologies at play and so many different implementations. There's a lot of, browsers working with screen readers, working with all kinds of different software, and a lot of things that that have to be kept up to date. It's kind of just like juggling a million different old Internet Explorer versions sometimes. And there are also so many inaccessible websites that make it really, really hard to nail down exactly what users expect to happen when they come across different types of things on the web. That's not to say that you shouldn't follow specs. There are really great pattern libraries at our disposal from other people in the accessibility space, especially that are a really great place to start. And of course, we have ARIA, which is the Accessible Rich Internet Application Spec, which is an incredibly powerful resource for implementing accessible solutions. But of course, with great power comes great responsibility. And it's definitely not a stand in for actually asking users what works for them and why when you have that opportunity. Sometimes, it's like progressive enhancement. It's better to start with a simpler solution that gets the job done. So it's accessible by keyboard. It gives users status updates when they perform actions, but maybe those status updates are done more with sort of brute force JavaScript focus management. And it's not an ideal solution, but it's reactive, and that's important. And the sooner you can get feedback on that, the better. You can ask users what's working well for them and what's not, and then build up from there. I sometimes sort of find that when solutions are built this way, it actually ends up being easier for the users to give feedback on what they liked and didn't like about it, because sometimes it's a little bit more obvious what's going on versus when something works seamlessly and it works, but it's not exactly clear why. I interviewed a screen reader user interacting with a component that I had built perfectly to the ARIA spec for keyboard and screen reader interactions. And when they got to it, they were eventually able to use it, but they weren't sure what they did exactly that made it work. When I asked what they expected to be able to do, they didn't know. I knew what ARIA expected they should be able to do, but they didn't know that. There are so many different implementations of things across the internet, all done differently. And all too often, these things simply just don't work for users of assistive technology. Trying to nail down expectations is really difficult right now. Until everyone is on board with inclusive design and we flip that scale, user research is one of the best tools that we have to know how to do the right thing. And it's also really fun.